from a lady who teaches this stuff, sustainability development, at QUT, one of our sponsors. Dr. Cheryl Desha is a member of the Natural Edge project, and she's been developing programs for developing sustainable development. So let's hear how we're going to do this. Yeah, that's right. So would you please make welcome Dr. Cheryl Desha.
Good afternoon, everyone. So technically I shouldn't be here. Technically it's T minus 2 days for me. I'm supposed to be on maternity leave, and Tim managed to cajole me through my whole maternity leave to helping think about this event and what it meant for the significance of where we're at in planetary decision making. So if I stuff up, Tim, I'm off the books. But let me show you a picture of what has driven me to be here today. So this is my 6-month-old, Hannah, and I show the picture of the planet every lecture that I give. It's my way of saying thank you to the planet as an introduction to the conversation around sustainable development. My second older child is 2.5 years old, and he was born on the 30-year anniversary that this photo was taken on the 7th of December 2012. And that was pretty significant for me. I can't say I planned it, but it was a bit of a serendipitous moment in thinking about 30 years on from that picture, where we have come to, and then what he and his younger sister have to look forward to during their lifetimes. So that's the context for the passion that I have around this area of sustainable development. And I think why I have created my life career around capacity building and education, as well as researching the technicalities around what's possible. I'm born in Mauritius, one of those island states that is thinking seriously about their future as a result of sea level rise. Fortunately, it's got a bit of a volcanic centre, so they've got somewhere to run to, but all of their sugarcane production area, and indeed their reef that surrounds the island, is entirely dependent on the level of the ocean, and that's their economy. So my father is Indian, my mother is Welsh, and people say, "Where are you from?" And I say, "This planet. This is where I'm from. There's nowhere else to go, and somehow my kids need to be able to live here." The same as Digby, same as Will, over the next 50 years and beyond, in a way that doesn't jeopardise themselves or other species. So that's a long-winded way of saying the Brundtland Commission's report definition of sustainable development. This is my other way of saying it, and the kids like this better. This is a cartoon by Loonig called an understandoscope. And have you ever had a kaleidoscope when you were a kid, when you look through and the picture changes? You ever been really frustrated? You created a picture and you wanted to keep it, and your brother or sister whacked you in the arm and changed the picture, and you could never go back. Well, that was probably a bit of a problem for you at the time, but it's good for us in thinking about the way we learn. Because if we can create understandoscopes for ourselves, once we learn something new about what's possible for sustainable development, our theory is you can't go back. You can't unlearn the opportunities that are presented by what I'm about to share with you. And there's some critical threshold learning areas, particularly inspired by this joining of spatial information and sustainable development, that creates so much hope for Digby and Will and the colleagues in the neighbouring room. There's no room for despair for the next generation, is my key point. So these are the pivotal principles that open up the dialogue for this event, and I'm talking to this second one around real-world context. So from open data and ensuring that everyone has access to information, being able to integrate the spatial information systems and sustainable development, where one empowers the other, like Peter was saying around Cubby Creek Station, to be able to generate solutions around objectivity with the usual political gumph that goes around it. I mean, gosh, it'd be pretty boring if we were all just objective and sat there and made decisions without having a bit of argy-bargy. Nevertheless, having real-world context in terms of the complexity that has is something that I'll talk briefly about today. And then informed visualisation that creates that reality. So if you're interested in the learning side, these are the books that the team, the Natural Edge Project's put together over the last 12 or so years, and you'll get this package so you can Google it. There's 2 graphs. This is the first. If you struggle with graphs, you can close your eyes and just listen. That's fine. They're not too hard. The first one is around the waves of innovation, and it's an illustration of where our innovation has been inspired over the last 200 years since the Industrial Revolution. And you may notice on the diagram that these humps are getting closer together and they're also getting steeper. A quick visual way of demonstrating that when people say, I don't like change, what they're really saying is, I live change every day of my life, but I don't like talking about it very much. But we've experienced, 3 waves of innovations over our lifetimes, and along the way, enabled masses of development around our planet without having the internet, without having this spatial information revolution. This 6th wave of innovation that we have previously put terms like sustainability and radical resource productivity, whole systems thinking, biomimicry, gosh, I'd love to talk to you about it, but not today. Our team didn't put spatial information in that list. And my journey here on is to actually create it as the underpinning mechanism for enabling that to happen. Indeed, this is the 2nd graph. Don't despair. You can keep your eyes closed if you like. The key point of this graph, which we call our decoupling diagram, and it appears in our latest, the 2010 book, Sense and Sustainability, is around the critical concept of being able to decouple or take apart, detach negative environmental pressure from all the good stuff that surrounds economic growth and well-being. When you look at this diagram, if you like this kind of thing, you may notice that there is a curve on the negative environmental pressures. To begin with, perhaps you might look at things like the ozone gases and development last century. The production of ozone gas was closely correlated with economic growth. But through the Montreal Protocol, we were able to taper the increase of ozone gases to a point where they peaked. We were still producing ozone gases at that point. It wasn't a zeroing of ozone gas production. It's a very common mistake that people make in thinking about peaking. The stuff's still being emitted, but we've peaked our increase of production. That's one set of challenges for our sector to address in terms of spatial information enabling that conversation. It's an entirely different conversation then to think about how we absolutely decouple or completely remove the environmental pressure from the economic growth. So the complexity in the rising and then the peaking and then the tailing of this graph is many, many careers worth of opportunities in innovation and entrepreneurship for people who are interested in this game. On the bottom, we have another curve, which is about recoupling positive environmental benefits with our economic growth. This one is where our team gets very excited because it includes terms like restoration, rehabilitation, recovery, and then net positive development, and indeed prosperity for the 21st century. How do we engage things like aquifer recharge or ocean acidification reduction or biodiversity increase with making a good buck or two along the way and improving our economy? That recoupling agenda is very exciting because if you look at the personal analogy of health, if you stopped eating all your hamburgers and you curbed your calorific intake, you would have peaked and then perhaps you tail off your junk food. At the end of that journey, you're perhaps still a little bit overweight, very unhealthy with a heart that's very sick. Similarly with the planet, we get to the end of our journey of peaking our carbon dioxide emissions and many other pollutants, we've still got a very degraded system and a degraded habitat. So that recoupling is critical to be able to improve the resilience of our planet and humanity to the next 100, 200 years of our close existence, if you like, but whatever happens thereon. So this resilience part of the curve is incredibly important and exciting. In the narrative for my talk today, it mentioned whole system thinking and biomimicry. So biomimicry is innovation that is inspired by nature, biomimicry. And I think Xinwei will talk a little bit around this context in his Green World Cities conversation after me. It's my personal passion for my research with the team here at QUT around a concept called biophilic urbanism, or nature-loving cities. And therein lies a plethora of opportunities for spatial information to inform the automatic monitoring and planning and design of how nature becomes a formally integrated part of cities, beyond the occasional green facade or green roof. But there are other terms like resource productivity and the decoupling I just spoke to on the previous graph. These kind of threshold learning opportunities, or the aha moments that you get when you look through this kaleidoscope and your viewpoint changes forever, they're the kinds of moments that we're looking for in this industry to be able to engage with government and engage with community, so that the conversations around Cubby Station or any delta management in our very dry land become more objective, with people appreciating the context. And of course, underpinned by spatial information and data. How am I doing for time? Good? Bang on. So the last image I wanted to share with you, well, let's go there. I've got 2 minutes, haven't I? Anyone know what this is? Giant kelp, giant sea kelp, off the coast of WA. This stuff hangs in the water, giant, beautiful, meters and meters tall, quite voracious currents running past this sea kelp. And one of our colleagues, a colleague of Tim's, Jay Harmon, is also a scuba diver. He was off the coast of the WA coastline about 10 years ago now, would it be, Tim? In his scuba diving gear, sitting on the bottom of this sea kelp bed and just enjoying it. And, you know, being an engineer, he thought, I wonder if I can pull this out. So he went to grab it with both hands because the current was pretty strong, and it just ripped out, and he could pull it out with 2 fingers. And he thought, how on earth is this stuff standing in this really, really strong current and looking like it's hardly moving? So he went through a process of inquiry because he had a hobby and he was thinking outside of the box in a whole systems way. Inspired by nature, he went back to the lab and recreated that in a tank. And what he and his team realised was that this stuff actually bent in the water in what's called a laminar flow, or a sheet flow. So instead of the water pushing it around, it created an environment where the water was flowing through it and it would elegantly drift in that. Hardly any friction, hardly any energy needed to stay still in that. What did Jay do with that? Well, he went and created something that could be commercialised rather than just writing a research paper on how beautiful sea kelp is when it moves in the ocean. He realised that it moved in a Fibonacci sequence, and he created what's called the Pax impeller. So a propeller, which moves, 60% of the energy on the planet is used to move something from somewhere to somewhere else, right? 60% of the energy on this planet is used to move something from somewhere to somewhere else through a pipe. Propellers create lots of turbulence and push it through. It takes a lot of energy to create turbulence and push stuff. The impeller, thanks to nature, inspired by nature, creates a laminar flow and pulls it through. Significantly, we're talking 60, 70, 80% energy reductions in that requirement to get stuff from somewhere to something else. So did Jay stay in Australia? No, this was 10 years ago. He moved to America and went underground, and they're still working to patent and commercialise this technology, and it's starting to appear in everything from air conditioning systems to laptops to, anything that has to move something, air or water or any other liquid, from A to B. Keep your eyes peeled and you'll start to see things that come out in the marketplace that they perhaps might market it as being quiet and low energy. Just one example of thousands that you can find where nature has inspired innovation with this whole systems thinking. But until you know the right questions to ask, how can you get there? So I finished my talk by going back to Annapurna's quote from Mahatma Gandhi, who says that the future depends on what we do now. And when I think of that, I hear it as the future depends on what we do today. Going from what we know, with all of the data that's becoming available to us, to how we take that data to create wisdom and knowledge around it and act on it. Because as Peter said, the government cannot deal with the growth challenges that we face this century without the support of this industry and the data industry. But if we give them a lot of data, they won't know what to do with it.